Alright friends, welcome to another video about the transits of 2025, still in the month of April. Today we're going to be talking about a long-awaited transit for this year, and this is about Mars's opposition to Pluto in the sign of Aquarius. So Mars is at 3 degrees of Leo, Pluto is at 3 degrees of Aquarius, and it's making a T-square with the Sun in the sign of Taurus. The Sun has moved away from the perfection of this conjunction because the Sun will be at 5 degrees, but it still has an application and it's very relevant. So we'll be talking about that today. And just a little bit of housekeeping. If you like this video or the content of this channel, please do like, subscribe, and comment. And you can also go to my website at parisayazi.com. There you will be able to find the different kinds of chart readings that I have, as well as courses, articles, and other uploads. I'll put the link in the description below for that. Let us begin with this transit. So just going back to the statement I made, the long-awaited transit of this Mars-Pluto opposition. And that's because this is the third time and the final time that these two planets are going to face off as an opposition. The first time it was happening in that axis of Cancer and Capricorn, and then it happened another time in this axis of Aquarius and Leo during Mars's retrograde. And now for the last time with Mars going direct in the sign of Leo, it's opposing Pluto at this 3-degree mark, where Pluto is going to station pretty soon to start its retrograde motion. So this is a narrative. This is an ongoing narrative that's been going on, and we've been trying to figure it out. And we're going to have one last face-off and see what comes of it. Another reason why this alignment is really worth examining, I mean, if you wanted to think about the most intense combination in astrology, especially if you're considering the traditional planets and the modern planets, there is probably no other combination that's more intense than Mars-Pluto opposition. Mars-Pluto conjunction too. But when we have opposition, we have things being pulled in different directions. So the tension and the friction and the confusion that they create is a hell of a lot more than when they're conjunct. Because when two planets are conjunct, we're just blending their symbols and their meanings. So we just get an intensification of Pluto and Mars. But an opposition is saying that we're being pulled to different directions, which brings a complete different narrative into the picture. And we got to remember, Mars in its worst manifestation represents violence. In its best form, it's upright actions. Pluto, on the other hand, it represents very raw, unrefined power at its worst. At its best, it brings about a kind of a death and a rebirth, a transformation. So the intensity, no matter how we flip this coin from a negative perspective or a positive perspective, is not a light one. It's not a benefic one. So just to put this into context, when we talk about the intensity and the much awaited transit, just gonna go a little bit over Mars and Pluto's significations and what they symbolize. So we start to have a feeling for this. So it becomes a little bit more visceral in terms of what we're talking about. We can say Mars represents willpower, action, or instincts, instinct to act, instinct to react. It also represents aggression or instinctual fight for survival comes from Mars. And Mars, as I was saying earlier, it can go into places where it pertains to war and violence because of that aggression that's in it. And Pluto, again, represents raw power, is the need for absolute control. So we come to see a lot of control issues when Pluto comes into the picture. It also represents the deep hidden undercurrents of our psyche, what's subconscious and even unconscious. And in its finality, because it comes to bring things to an end, it also represents a kind of a transformation, so a death and a rebirth. That transformative process is related to Pluto. So we can say in some ways they're both talking about power that has a lot of similarity and likeness to one another. And in modern astrology, in evolutionary astrology, Pluto is labeled or described as being as the higher octave of Mars. So it has a lot of those Martian qualities, but a lot more intense. Like, we can think of Mars as the kind of violence that's within us that comes out consciously. Whereas Pluto is acting from the undercurrents of the subconscious, and that's where the violence comes out of. So Mars may very consciously is signifying that I'm going to control you through very aggressive action that I'm going to perform, and in that manner, I'm going to control you. Pluto says, I'm going to kind of manipulate in the background. It's subconsciously coming to the surface to have this need to want to control and to exert one's power. So one is covert, one is overt. So we're talking about power struggles and struggles to get dominance and control here. And it's also worth remembering, in the last video I was mentioning, when we look at Mars's ingress into the sign of Leo, we have to take into consideration where Mars is coming from the sign of Cancer, where it was repressed, suppressed, maybe even oppressed. It did not have the license to act. Then it comes into the sign of Leo, where right away it gets a pass that you can now be activated, active, ignite, do what it is that you want to do. So it's going from a place of impotency to an absolute place of potency. And I was saying in the last video, we have to proceed with some caution. We can't take this pass and feel that it's a free license to act however way we want to act, because this is a very common human narrative. When a person or when a population of people have been repressed and when they are given the power, there comes a power struggle where the repressed and the oppressed will oppress other people for a period of time. So we have to be conscious of this in our own individual lives too now. We can feel the need for domination and aggressively exerting our power. And this is just coming from Mars coming into the sign of Leo from a sign where it was debilitated for 7 months. Now, let alone that we have this Pluto opposition to it also. And you know what? You can see this on the world stage right now when you look at the trade wars and the economic wars that are happening right now between US and China. We're seeing these power dynamics at play, right? Which is essentially an act of control. But I'm not going to get too political, as I say in other videos. Otherwise, this thing's going to take a left turn or a right turn and go somewhere else. But the point I was trying to get to, that as the second point here, is that this combination of Mars and Pluto specifically is indicating a very explosive confrontation. So yes, we have the power struggles and we have the control issues right now, but it is also indicating a confrontation and a face-off. And Mars right now, because Mars is a quick planet, it's impatient, it's at its worst, it can be impulsive. Mars wants a quick resolution right now, especially where it's dignified in the sign of Leo. But Pluto likes to hold things and milk it to the last drop. I mean, it's it's the slowest moving planet. It's the last planet in astrology, not in astronomy. It's no longer a planet, poor guy. But in astrology, he is the last planet, the furthest from the sun. So his orbit is the longest. So Mars is like, let's find a resolution. Let's act quick. Let's resolve this. Let's just have a punch out right now. And the last man standing, that's the winner. Pluto's like, I'm gonna like keep you in this chokehold where you can't breathe for a very long time. And then we'll see who's going to be standing. And this is because Pluto's symbolism is always indicating that it puts things into a pressure cooker. It's like, you know, those pressure cookers, pressure's just building up, and then you actually have to open the valve to let off some steam. Pluto doesn't. That valve is like sealed, and the lid is eventually going to have to explode from that internal pressure. This is what this opposition's like. And from all the planets, the one planet you don't want to put in a pressure cooker is Mars. This is the crazy part right now. Because what does Mars represent? Anger, rage, retaliation, war, explosions, cutting, severing. So when you put Mars under a lot of pressure and it's in a fire sign where it can actually act these ways, this is the kind of consequences that can come out of this, or at least this is what it's representing. But we can also look at this slow, containing, holding aspect of Pluto as a way of, in our own personal lives at least, showing us how to transform and transmute anger and rage that might be within into our power. You see this a lot with athletes, right? You see it in movies when you watch it, that boxer who's just like coming in with anger, and then they have to transmute and transform that anger into a kind of a productive energy. This is another thing that can come out of this combination. So that confrontation can allow us to tap in to this inner resource too, and not just be destructive through and through in whatever direction we look at it. The third signature that can come out of this is like we can call it the crisis of will. So this is Mars's will against Pluto's will. And I want you to imagine this. This is not like my will can shake your will and move your will. I want you to take into consideration what's at play here. Mars is in a fixed sign of Leo. Pluto is in the fixed sign of Aquarius. Sun is in the fixed sign of Taurus. Like nothing here wants to budge. Again, going to the world stage. US put sanctions on China. You would think, okay, that much, they're going to do something. They're going to budge. That's not what happened. China came back, raised the stakes, and imposed higher tariffs on US. US wasn't like, all right, this is crazy. Let's just cut it out. US came back and imposed higher sanctions on China. So this is what I'm telling you. It's immovable will. Like no one wants to budge right now. So these can signify external oppositions that we have in life where they don't want to budge and we're not willing to budge. And these kinds of things can become precursors for war. And both of these planets are very much supportive of this concept. Now, I'm not saying that there's going to be a global war, but I'm just saying, even if we look at these tariffs on their own terms, it is a kind of an economic war right now. It's an economic cold war right now, what we're experiencing. Mind you, though, with all this fire should be hot, but Pluto's air sign is pretty cold. So maybe that's where it's coming from. It's almost making it impersonal, that Aquarius component to it. It's distant from us. It's affecting us directly, but it's happening out there in the world rather than personally in our lives. But when it comes to our individual selves, we do have these immovable fears within. We have compulsions. We have these unconscious motivations that no matter how we position ourselves externally in the world, they seem to just seep out and come out. They have this particular hold on us that's very hard to shake it off or to pivot and move away from it. In a sense, these internal processings dominate us, and then they impel us to come out in the world and dominate and control something else. You know, now that I'm talking about this alignment, I feel like I should have shown up with like some helmet and armor or something. It's darker than I was thinking about, but here we are. We're just going to have to negotiate with this energy, and then it's over, and then on to the next thing. So, you know what? Let me say how this could turn out in its worst manifestation, or what it's signifying in the worst case scenario, and how this can actually be signifying something that has some productive power in it. So in the worst case scenario, we're talking about obsessions, domination, and manipulation to the max. It's about violent or coercive behavior, and this can be internally or externally. It can also indicate feeling very burnt out from pushing against these immovable forces that just don't budge. And it can also indicate a lot of destruction, whether this is self-destruction or the kind of harm and destruction we impose externally. And a lot of it is coming from unresolved rage of some sort that is hidden, but it's informing the external actions, Mars. If we can transmute this, its best manifestation is something like fierce determination, is the ability to forcefully face our fears and not to back down and to face those shadows because they're coming out. You get to see it. You know, a lot of times we don't really get to see ourselves until we're in relation to someone else who's in a disagreement with us, who's at conflict with us, at opposition to us. And then we get to watch ourselves and the kind of reactions that we have. In that moment of reacting, it seems natural to have that kind of a reaction. But in hindsight, when we reflect back, there was a million different ways to react to that situation. And we have to ask ourselves, why like that? Why did I say those words? Why did I have those emotions? Why did I have that intent run through my mind? this is so intense that we're actually something's gonna come out where we're gonna get to see that. And it's worth taking note of that. That's the way to see it, and that's the first step to overcoming it. It's like some ugly darkness is coming from the back end and the recesses of our being into the forefront, which is also an opportunity to see it, to catch it, and we become this energy that I'm describing right now, that we hold it and we choke it and we're like, what are you about? Instead of having it do that to us and into our dynamics, social dynamics and personal dynamics. And when we see it, we'll see a lot of these dark inner shadows that come out. They are filled with resentment, anger and resentment, unprocessed anger and resentment. There's nothing wrong with anger, but when it just festers and it simmers in the background, its manifestation is resentment. But if we can see it, we can take that, undo it, and unpack it and use it as a kind of a strength and resiliency that we have. I mean, if we had the strength to hold on to that anger and that pain for so long and let it fester into resentment, it is saying something about that holding power that we have within to have been able to hold on to something so destructive. So we can transmute it when we know what we're dealing with. And another thing to remember about Mars in the sign of Leo, it's a signature that can protect. And Aquarius is also at the service of other people. So it becomes like an advocate. So this can also indicate becoming a very powerful advocate or a protector, which is the better manifestation of this sign. Nevertheless, that conflict, that opposing aspect is there. Otherwise, why do we need to protect anything, as an example? So we can look at this as a confrontation between conscious will and unconscious power drives that are hidden or within us. Like on a normal day, Mars will make a declaration like, I will do this. No matter what you say, I will do this because I want this. But with this combination is that I will do anything and by any means, and I'm even willing to destroy in order to get what I want. And we got to be careful. Like, this is going really far. This is getting psychotic, right? There's a big difference between like, I want that and I will do that, and then going all the way to I will do it by any means necessary. So we're getting that kind of a flare in the air at the moment. So now I want to start bringing the sun into the mix. I just took a little short break. So if I'm completely out of the frame, please excuse me. But I want to go on a little rant, if you guys permit me. If you don't want to hear it, there are timestamps, but you'll just go forward. I want to talk about the fixed nature of these three signs interacting with each other, because before this opposition to Pluto, Mars has already perfected its square with the sun when sun ingressed into the sign of Taurus. So a few degrees back. And there's something to understand about the modality of the signs, like the fixed signs, because all these three signs are fixed. We can think of them in terms of seasons, the metaphor we're all accustomed to hearing. It's like the season has settled. This is now it. And after that fixed nature, it comes the dual signs where they're kind of loosening up this fixed nature of the season. And then the cardinal takes it to the next season altogether. But I want you to think about the sign of Leo's, the fixed nature of the sign of Leo. Imagine your heart in your chest. It's like this one singular place. And when you think about the heartbeat, the beating of it is out and in. It's almost as if something wants to burst forth, but then is pulled back into that center again. That's like the fixed nature of nature of Leo. It's expressing that which is fixed in the center and it emanates. But that emanation cannot just like burst forth and be free and go. It's pulled back in again. So it's kept into that center. Now think about the sign of Taurus. Taurus represents our face. Take any other body part that you have. You cannot find a more like a collection of diverse things held in one field. Like the eyes are very different than the nose. The mouth is different than the teeth. The ears are different than the forehead. So Taurus acts as a field that collects things and just keeps them there, allows them to be nourished and cultivated. So it's fixing things by holding it in that manner. And then we go to the sign of Aquarius and how it's fixed. Like, take different social institutions or subcultures or different components of society. They're all these dispersed, segregated, segmented parts. And then Aquarius acts as this field where it can hold this eclectic multitude in one place. So when we are now bringing like the sun into the mix here, we're talking about a modality that wants to keep things in the same place, but in different ways. So with that in mind, that was my little rant. Let's just go back into bringing the sun into the mix of all of this as a T-square. And one thing to remember, because of the fixed signs too, they're all talking about a kind of a control. And at its best manifestation, we're going to exert internal control. And at its worst, we're going to have to deal with unequal power relations on some level. And when we bring the sun in, sun is the most powerful planet. I mean, in our solar system, even Pluto, this dark god of the underworld, it's still orbiting around the sun. So we're talking about three powerhouses coming into a conflictual kind of a conversation or a dynamic with each other. And in fixed signs, all three are stubborn. All three of them want their own way. That's why I'm saying it's about control issues and power dynamics. But while those two psychos are fighting it out, Sun is doing something a little bit different. The Sun, as the center, always wants to create stability. It's going into a sign, or it is in a sign, that is about creating stability, support, and security. It's trying to anchor us. In other words, it is about preservation. While those two psychopaths are fighting to get their way, there is some third factor here that's trying to maintain the integrity of what is. And that is adding tension to those two psychopaths fighting. I don't have another name for that Pluto-Mars opposition. But we also have to remember, Pluto is in the superior position to Sun. And Pluto in Aquarius really wants to destabilize what is stable. For example, the Sun in the sign of Taurus is making a lot of pleas, or is trying to put its feet down and say, we have to maintain some traditions here. Like you two fighting for whatever it is that you're fighting about, you're deteriorating the very thing that gives us stability and security. And then Pluto and Aquarius, like, you are outdated, and that entire field of tradition needs to be abolished and destroyed. So Pluto in general, I mean, since its ingress into the sign of Aquarius, that's what its aim is going to be. It's going to be destabilize, deconstruct, and undo what has traditionally been set into place to create something new. That death, transformation, and rebirth process that's related to Pluto in its entire long transit. And because it is in the sign of Aquarius, especially when it comes to those traditional aspects of what has been given us, our sense of security. And you know what? I'm calling Pluto a psychopath here, but in some ways too, we have to remember that when certain tradition and norms become so normative, they become unconscious. And we become unconscious of its pitfalls also. So to have Pluto right now shake things up and question these traditions and how we have been doing things, it's taking those norms out of our subconscious mind and asking us, how normal is it really that you've been behaving this way, that you've been setting the structures of your society and yourself this way? And when that happens, what happens? Right away, we come to question the legitimacy of the powers that have power over us. And you know what? I can't get my mind out of the gutter of politics. You can't help but to see that right now. I don't know if you guys saw those videos that came out of the manufacturing structures of China, like Hermes bags and all these high-end designer products that people buy in the West. They were showing that, okay, it costs us $1,400 to make this bag, but when you buy it, you're paying $38,000 for this purse. And basically, you are paying almost 98% for that name. And what is that name? It's a narrative, it's a story of power that you've been sold. And they're saying, if you actually want the bag, you want the quality of the bag, you want the leather, and you want the craftsmanship that you're paying $38,000 for, you can come and purchase it from us for $1,400 without the label. So they're dismantling that illusion and that narrative that had become so normal to associate having power, for example, to a purse. So they're dismantling that illusion that had become our normative way of thinking. This is the kind of power that Pluto brings into the forefront right now. So what is Pluto doing? Is drilling through the masks and the personas, the taken for granted value systems that we've come to have, the moralities that we've internalized as something that's right. And it's just piercing through the collective illusion right now to show us the shadow side, what's behind it, what's driving it, what's motivating it, and what the outcome of it is. So it's showing us you think that you're living some sort of a truth, but that truth is non-applicable today. Like who you are and how you do things right now and the way you engage in these power struggles, they're all shadow points. None of them are real right now. And we have to remember some of Mars's fight right now is for the sun in some ways, because who is the ruler of Leo is Sun. Even though they're making that square, Mars is going to a war with Pluto in that opposition because it's trying to fight for how things used to be, how things ought to be, what we have always valued. That heart that wants to come out of the chest, but in the sign of Leo, it will contain it again. So Mars could very well come here to fight for those internalized power structures rather than fighting them. That's a great possibility right now. And again, going back to Trump, for example, right now, let me be polite because that is his title, President Trump right now. In a lot of ways, if you think about it from that conservative Republican perspective, they want to maintain the traditions, right? A world that is moving technologically into the future, he wants to bring factory manufacturing back. One has to question that in terms of would it not be more wise to get that population of your society technologically advanced and prepare them for the future rather than them putting them back on the factory floors, putting in screws. Yes, it's understood that people need a job today, but you can see the struggle, right? The power struggle between the future and the past, the power struggles that need to be maintained and the things that are being done. Like globally is mind-boggling to see that right now and how literal it is in front of us. So in a sense, the sun and the Mars, see, that's a Persian in me. We put a the before everything. The sun and Mars, their fight in a lot of ways is against Pluto. And maybe that Pluto retrograde is saying something after this whole showdown. We'll leave that for another video. And you know, what is known, even when it's wrong, it always feels more comfortable. Sign of Taurus, a lot of ways of looking at it is in terms of it wants to create a kind of a stability that can act as a place that feels secure and comfortable. This is one of the reasons why Moon's exalted in the sign of Taurus, right? This fluctuating planet that's just up and down all the time. I have no light. I have all the light in the world that comes into the sign of Taurus. And no matter what its own condition is, it's stabilized in that sign. So the sun is constantly wants to get our attention, our vision, how we see things, and to look how the good old ways used to work for us. Let's maintain that. That is comfortable, that is secure. And there's a lot of pain in evolving and in changing the things that Pluto's demanding right now. But Pluto is unrelenting in that fixed sign too. It's like the old way has to die. There is no way. So in a lot of ways, we can look at this and we can say the dinosaurs of PowerPoints within our own lives, it could be in our own family dynamics, in our work, or on the global level. Old power dynamics are coming to a clash and they're forced to go deep down into the root of how they're structured. It's almost as if Pluto wants to uproot it from the roots and be like, this is what it's about. Going back to those manufacturers in China showing the purses, for example, like ancestral and cultural values could come to the forefront in terms of evaluate it. Is this how you want to live? Do you want to repeat the same thing? In some ways, We are forced to see what our value systems are. And again, Sun in Taurus is bringing that flavor to the forefront. And the fixed nature of these signs are bringing that to the forefront. Those invisible hands that we inherit also being shown, and how they have created these normative ways of being. And Pluto is showing its abnormality. And when Saturn comes into the sign of Aries, talking about showing abnormalities, that's really going to come into play too. Again, that's a topic for another video. And we could say there's one blatant question in the air right now, which is, what are you going to fight for? And when I was prepping and thinking through this video's contents, like, what am I going to say? How am I going to frame this? There was one person keep popping up in my head, like repeatedly, over and over. It was as if he was keeping me company through the whole thing. And that's Nietzsche. Nietzsche is a Western philosopher, German philosopher, who talked extensively about the master-slave morality in his books and writings. And he said that the kind of values that we have, whether if they are related to religion, spirituality, cultural, social, they're not inherently true. Those are not, like, what is morality? He's constantly questioning us to dig deeper into what are we talking about. And he says that they're often created unconsciously. And he's saying that a lot of the value systems that we have, what we call morality, if you go down to the root of them, they're stemming from fear, repression, oppression, commanded obedience for our survival, and they're means of social control that have just become our normative way. And now we see them as what is moral to do, and we come to value them. And saying these values maintain the integrity of that dynamic between master and slave. And when we look at this alignment, is kind of trying to show us that right now, whether if it's in our own personal lives or on a global political economic level. And he was saying, he has a book, Beyond Good and Evil. He is saying that even though these moralities and value systems may arise out of repression, oppression, and this master-slave kind of dynamic, we also have to understand they were created due to our survival instinct. And they become embedded in society, whether as our morality or religions, and even in our spiritual practices, so that we can out-survive that moment. In Iran, we have this custom, it's called Taurus, and it's a very polite demeanor. I feel that the next closest culture that has something similar are the Japanese. But when you look at where Iran is geographically located, it's in the center of Asia. It's been called the gateway of the East to the West and the West to the East. So when you look at Iran's history, it has always been dealing with invaders and what would qualify as enemies. So this Taurus, this politeness that we have in our culture, which makes us act subservient to, let's say, our guest, and to offer everything to them, is an act of self-defense for self-preservation and survival that has stemmed from our history. But now it's become part of our custom, part of our value system, part of our morality. So that's what Nietzsche's saying. It's like, okay, Iranians had to do that. I'm not quoting, he didn't study Iran in that way. I'm just saying, if he could say that, he would say, okay, Iranians had to do that in order to survive. So that was a value system that ensured their survival. But now, today, that might not be something that has a healthy application anymore. And it would be good to look at it at least and be like, where is that rooted in? What is that doing to our psychology? So this is what Pluto's trying to show us right now, because they've become unconscious now. That's just what we do. That's just the right thing to do, the good thing to do. When things become taken for granted, they start to regulate our drive. That's what we call those shadow points in the background, right? That's why we can't see them. We inherited them. We have them now. They inform us in terms of how we should do things, but we don't even know why we're doing it. But as we do it, we're maintaining the current power structures while we're making ourselves subservient to it and not even understanding how we're doing it or why we're doing it. But we're doing it. And Pluto's like, no more of doing it. And you know what? When Mars makes it into Aquarius and conjuncts Pluto, which is months from now. We're going to have a clear vision of what this moment was about. But this confrontation's bringing things from the background to the forefront, from the bottom to the top, from the inside to the outside, so we can see it. This is the initiation of it. So we can just see this T-square as a moment to reevaluate what we call good, valuable, moral, true, secure, safe, and the things that we're willing to fight for, which is Mars in the sign of Leo right now. It's going to show us how we're clinging to old values that ensured the survival of the past, our past selves or our ancestors, but now they limit us. It's like being asked right now, are you building your life on some sort of a blueprint, or is this the actual blueprint of your life? Or do you want to hold on to comfort because you don't want to confront different types of power that will challenge you because that's comfortable? It's going to ask you, are you at the seat of your own power? Do you have control over your life actually when you look at your life? Or is your day dominated by how you ought to act, where you ought to be, how you make your money, how you behave, how you feel? We're really being challenged in terms of understanding, are we self-defined and self-determined, or are we just controlled by external power dynamics and we're defining ourselves based on those expectations and values? I know this moment really reflects one of the most famous sayings by Nietzsche, that we ourselves have to, at some point, become the creators of new values. And the beginning of this reevaluation is to really understand our drives, what's entrenched within us, how we've been wired and configured. So Pluto here is like kind of like a subconscious purging at the moment. And eventually, this is what's going to allow Mars to see what's worth fighting for the integrity and the dignity of the self, or maybe the integrity and the dignity of the nation. Something that's really worth fighting for now, that carries us to the future. This T-square is also drawing attention to what is absolutely necessary for our survival now. And part of that survival is now contingent on reclaiming our own power in our individual lives and within society also. In a lot of ways, the old scaffoldings that were holding us, like where the sun is in the sign of Taurus, is starting to have cracks on it. And this Mars squaring the sun, Mars really wants to take its orders from the sun. It is in the sun sign. But something's getting scrambled here too, with that square to the sun. The dignity of Mars right now is contingent on understanding, what do I fight for? It can't be that Plutonian thing completely, because what this guy's asking for technically still doesn't have an application. It doesn't. Pluto just ingress into the sign of Aquarius. And then Mars is looking at the sun. It's like, I am at your service, but dear sire, I also don't understand why you're so persistent on what you're being persistent on, because that's also creating a fracture. So this Mars is meant to set us free, but after facing a lot of challenges and conflictual dynamics. And, just to keep this practical, look at your chart, look at where the sign of Taurus, Leo, and Aquarius place in your chart. It's talking about those spheres of life coming into this conflictual confrontation. And it's talking about the people that pertain to these houses. This is how these dynamics are playing themselves out. So let's say you do have an Aquarius rising, and then you have Taurus in your 4th house, and then you have Leo in your 7th house. The self relative to the other, let's say, the 7th house, the self relative to your marriage, let's say. Look at the kind of war that's occurring in that marriage and understand how those value systems are actually coming from familial backgrounds in the 4th house, for example, right? So you can look at the chart in terms of those kinds of dynamics. It's also telling you where you're craving stability, where you're resisting change, where you need deconditioning, where there has to be a kind of an evolution now, especially where Pluto is sitting in your chart. And what are you actually fighting for? This is very important to understand at this moment of life. You can also look at this in terms of like there's a version of you, there's a drive within that just wants peace at any cost, just to feel stable and just to feel secure. But there's another part of you that's looking at that drive and it's saying, yeah, you can have that peace, but it's at the expense of you being powerless and in a state of submission. Do you actually want that? And that's what's creating that internal conflict. Like there's this question in the air right now. Am I going to evolve or devolve? Like what do I fight for? Where do I go? What's my value system? And I was explaining that in the previous video with, I was emphasizing Mars coming out of the sign of Cancer because it was trying to see, make us see our survival instinct, like the absolute necessities that we need to have in life. That's what it was trying to do. So we already have a glimpse of that with that 7 months of Mars's debilitation. So I encourage you to actually watch that video. It's going to put this video into more of a context, but I don't want to repeat because this video has already gotten too long. You know, just want to wrap this video up. It really is getting too long. This is a good moment for us to ask ourselves, am I living by my own values or am I living values that were chosen for me? And do they make sense? Because that's okay sometimes, but do they make sense now? Do they bring greater value into my life? Or another question, are you actually building a life? Are you just maintaining the old patterns, which are survival patterns? There's no thriving. There's never going to be any kind of thriving coming out of that. Another question worth asking, like, am I a tyrant or maybe am I living under another person's tyranny? And then ultimately the question right now is, what are you going to do about it? There's action now in the charts. This time supports action, choosing, moving, exerting our will. This is also a moment to understand our unconscious loyalty. And this could be loyalty to systems because we have Aquarius here and Pluto's really trying to disrupt that. And systems that promise us belonging, but the price for it is compliance. Loyalty to fight old fights that in reality no longer have meanings. It's like people blowing people up because of some historical factors which are legit, but we know better today. So we could do better. Nonetheless, we proceed as we always have. And that fixed nature of the sign is very much bringing this question of loyalty into the forefront. What are we loyal to? Are we loyal to the right things in this life? Are we fighting for the right things or the wrong things? And emotions to be aware of with this kind of an alignment or what it's indicating. It's a lot of resistance because of that fixed nature that's here, even though it's demanding so much change and action. It's fixed. So there's resistance and friction. There can be anxiety, there can be anger, rage, and all of these could be happening in relation to other people, or it could just be happening very much internally. This is the internal landscape that we have that we're grappling with. And I would argue at the end of the day, when everything's said and done, this isn't about controlling other people or restricting ourselves and controlling ourselves. It's about understanding what this inner framework is, where its confines are, where it's fragile, where it's strong, how to work with it. Certain things have to be reconfigured, shift, get deconstructed, reconstructed. This is Pluto's long-term transit, and it's really bring those rooted stuff to the surface through this transit. And I'll leave you with a quote from Nietzsche and wrap this up because way longer than I thought it was going to be. He says, "He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow." So that's why I keep saying it's bringing the bottom to the top for us to see it. But I'll leave it here. And I wish you have a powerful moment, an empowered one through this transit. And that's it for today. Sending you much love. Till next time.